Every leader knows that a thriving organization depends on the energy, productivity, and commitment of its people. But few leaders are able to cultivate the employee engagement and performance needed for this level of success. What's the difference? Positive leadership practices. Welcome to the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast with your host, positive work culture expert, Alex Bratty. Ready to harness the power of positive leadership? Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bratty, and in this episode, we're going to be discussing how you can be a positive leader even when you're surrounded by negativity. It's a juicy topic. It really is. And just before we dive right in, I want to thank you so much for being here. And if you enjoy the show, please subscribe, rate, and review it so we can expand this positive leadership movement even more. Now, as you know, many of my episodes are inspired by the questions you send me, right? I don't just sort of make this stuff up. I am responding to what you're telling me that you want information on, right? And so this episode is no exception. This episode is in response to a question asked by one of our listeners, Melinda, and she asked quite simply, can you do an episode on how to stay positive among a negative leadership team? Well, she asked, we answered, and this is it. And remember, if you've got a burning question about positive leadership or you're grappling with an issue like this or something else in your leadership role in your organization, just drop me a line at questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com and I'll address it on the show because I want to be responsive to what you are looking for, what you need. All right, back to Melinda's question, and I want to thank her for raising it because I know she's not alone on this one. I get asked about this a lot, and I really want to provide some actionable suggestions on this because many people assume that if you're surrounded by negativity, there's nothing you can do. The bad outweighs the good, and so your positivity basically gets drowned out by the darkness. Now, there is some truth to that, okay? Certainly, we know from oodles of research that negative experiences have more impact than positive ones. Just think about the last time you gave a presentation or maybe suggested a new idea to a group. 99 out of 100 people might love it and one person hates it, and what do you focus on? Of course, the one person who doesn't like it. We all do this, and the reason we do it is because we're hardwired to pay closer attention to bad news or negative situations. I mean, it's an adaptive evolutionary feature that has kept us alive as human beings. You know, do you pay more attention to that car that's crossing over the median and into your lane and about to hit you? Or do you pay more attention to how much joy you experienced at your daughter's recital last night? In most cases, we're going to pay more attention and dwell longer on that car situation, right? But situations like that are a rarity now, right? We don't often have life or death scenarios like that every day like our ancestors did when they were, trying to figure out how to live out in the jungle or the desert and dealing with wild animals as predators, right? We don't really deal with that day in, day out, but our brain still works as if we do. And so we can, once we become mindful of that, we can begin to turn things around and focus more on the positive. And of course, we talk about that a lot on this show, right? The problem is that when you're trying to be positive and you're working on being a positive leader, you might find yourself with some negative Nellies on your leadership team. So what now, right? Because it just feels like, I'm trying to roll the boulder up the hill every day. I'm here, I'm being positive, but how can I sustain that when everyone around me is just blah, right? It's important. And this happens in teams. It happens in organizations. And as Melinda, indicated, it may be happening for her at a leadership level. So we're going to break this down. And we're going to talk about the 5 ways you can deal with this. Plus, I'm going to give you actually 3 tried and tested models for how you might be able to shift the energy and mood of your team. Okay, so they're going to kind of be embedded into these 5 ways. So ready to dive in? Ready to do this? Let's get to it. All right, so real quick before I get into the nuts and bolts, as always, let's just establish why we care about this, like why negativity in your leadership team can be such an issue. Well, let's go to the numbers, as I often do, because you know I love my research and you know I love my stats, and let's face it, they're often very compelling, and this one is very compelling. So Gallup, you've probably heard me mention them a few times before. They've done a ton of research on workplace engagement. You can check them out at gallup.com. They have a ton of free information, reports you can download there. They have estimated from their work that negativity costs the economy anywhere between $250 to $300 billion a year. $250 to $300 billion. That's a fairly significant sum. And the reason is because negativity adversely affects morale, performance, and of course, productivity, right? So yeah, that's a fairly compelling number to make us perk up and want to change things. So what exactly can you do? Let's go through these 5 steps that I have for you. So step number 1 is, like anything else in life, actually, realize that you can only control you. Right? You can't really control how other people behave or their attitudes. Now, you may be able to influence those, and we're going to get to those in subsequent steps, but right now in step 1 is self-awareness. We need to realize that we can only control us. And that starts with looking inward, right? So first, and this is sort of a diagnostic step, right, for you. Start paying attention to when you're feeling that negative energy, when you're feeling the negativity around you or coming at you, right? And try to be and do this in what's called the objective observer role, okay? Now, what that means is instead of being personally attached to what's going on, right, like instead of getting upset or disgruntled by it, see if you can almost like observe outside of yourself, right? Just notice and label it. Oh, it doesn't feel good. Why am I feeling this negative energy right now? What's happening here, right? Essentially, you want to get curious rather than personal or judgmental, right? So we feel the negativity, and very often it will have a personal impact on us, right? I'm not trying to ignore that, but for the purposes of this, like where we want to get really deep into this, we have to start being more self-aware and observing, okay, when do I feel this negativity? What is actually going on, right? And so we're becoming more open-minded to seeing exactly what is happening, right? The facts, rather than the story of what we might be thinking is happening, right? Because you know, we all tell ourselves stories, okay? You know, you're in a meeting, John's in a bad mood, and he basically takes it out on you, but you take that personally like it's an affront to your work, your worth as a part of this team, and we start to make up a story about it. Oh, John doesn't like me. John doesn't like my work. John is like a troublemaker at work. Well, you know what? Maybe John just had a really bad morning. Maybe his wife is sick. Maybe his kids are sick. Maybe he was running around trying to figure out how to take care of his family and get to work on time and get the report on the desk. And so, you know, look, we're all humans, right? And so John, yeah, he may have been snippy, but it wasn't about you, and it wasn't about anybody else in the room. It was about what he was bringing to the table, right? And so I sort of give that example to illustrate what I mean by let's observe the facts rather than the story we're attaching to them, right? So the facts of that situation would be, John was pretty snippy in the meeting today, right? The story you might be telling yourself is, John was pretty snippy in the meeting today. I don't think he likes me very much, or he doesn't like this project I'm leading, or, you know, he's going to be a problem as we try to implement this new initiative, right? There's all these things that we attach to it. So step number 1 is just to become more objective in observing the negativity, where it's coming from, how you're feeling it, and just really getting curious about this and being open-minded about it, okay? Because we've got to start from the very beginning, and it's almost like I said, a diagnostic step, right? Step number 2. Now, fair warning, this might feel like a little tough love, but it has to be done. In this one, you have to be honest and you have to think about how might you be contributing to the negativity, right? And I say you in a very general sense here, okay? I'm not directing this at anybody in particular because we all can do this, right? I know that I come to the table sometimes with my own frustrations, and just like John, I take it out on other people. I try not to. I try to be mindful of it, but it happens. We are humans, right? So be honest, right? Look in the mirror. Think about this. Are you as positive as you think you are, or are you allowing yourself to get caught up in the gossip or the backstabbing or the complaining that might be going on, right? Because it is really easy to get sucked into that, right? Somebody walks into your office, they're venting, they're complaining about someone, they're bitching about something, and you can just get swirled up in their energy, right? So if that's happening, you've got to draw a line in the sand and no longer participate. When you see it happening, you can simply say, thanks, but I'm not going to engage in this conversation any longer. You might even add that you're working on being less judgmental or less negative, and you just don't want to engage in what's being said. Now, this does not and should not be said in a judgmental way so that your colleagues now feel like you're somehow think that you're more righteous than them, right? It's got to be calm. It's got to be unassuming. It's got to be very open. And if you can deliver it in that way, you'll actually jolt others into thinking about their language too, right? Because think about it, and I don't know if you've ever had this experience where someone actually says it to you, you're venting, you're going on about something, you're complaining, and maybe they say to you, hey, I'm really glad you're able to vent about that, but I just want you to know I'm trying not to engage in this kind of conversation, or I'm trying not to gossip about people, and so I hope you respect my decision that I'm just going to disengage from the conversation, or maybe we can change the subject if you still want to chat, right? And it just can be that simple, that calm, and remember, leading by example is crucial, and this is an area where you really need to walk your talk, right? Like you need to be careful about the language you're using, and you need to start helping others see the language they're using. Again, not in a judgmental way, in a very factual, calm, open way. All right. So number 2 is we got to take a look at ourselves and see how might I be contributing and how can I draw a line in this and not do it anymore so that I start to really walk my talk on being positive and setting an example for others. All right. Step number 3. And this is where we start to bring in other people, and we start to bring in really a lot of the positivity approaches that we talk about in this show, right? So the step number 3 is focus on being the best person you can be, and the best leader you can be, and how you can bring the best out in others, right? Now, here again, leading by example is obviously really important, right? How can you expect others to be less negative or more positive if you're not showing them or giving them a reason to, right? You've got to decide that you are a beacon of positivity, that your light is going to shine bright and strong. And if I just stay on this analogy for a moment, if you do this effectively, think of yourself as a lighthouse, okay? Lighthouses are stable. They're always there. They're providing light and guiding everyone around them, right? They're guiding the sailors through the darkness, through the fog, through the rough seas, and they're always there. It's a constant, right? That light is always shining, and these sailors come to know that they can actually look for that lighthouse to guide them home if the weather is bad, right? So you, as a positive leader, are a lighthouse. You're a beacon of positivity, right? And so this is a step where you have to really make the decision that your positivity is going to be stronger than any negativity around you, right? Just like a lighthouse that's still standing there after the storm has gone. Just like a lighthouse is still standing there morning after morning after going through the dark nights, right? Just after the fog clears, the lighthouse is always there. And so you need to make that commitment, take the stand, become the lighthouse and be the beacon of light. Now, big dose of reality here. Do not expect people to change overnight just because you made this decision that you're now a beacon of positivity and you're imagining yourself as a lighthouse helping to guide them, okay? You make that decision right now. You might make it tonight. You go into work tomorrow and you're like, okay, everybody's going to be attracted to my light. Maybe not so fast, right? It will take some time for them to notice what's going on. But if you can be consistent with this, you will start to attract more positivity towards you, and you'll start to inject more positivity outwards as well. You'll start to infuse it into your leadership team and the organization. And the beauty of doing this is you know exactly what you're doing, but you're not forcing anything on anybody. You're not saying, okay, this is the way things are going to be. You're not doing any of that. You're just making a decision that you're going to be positive, and your positivity is going to be stronger than their negativity. And you're going to be stable and constant. You're going to be that lighthouse. Okay. All right. Step number 4. And this is where we do start to actively engage others to join you, right? So we're going to open the door for your leadership team to join your positivity. And here's where I'm going to give you the 3 big ideas I mentioned earlier, right? Like the 3 action items that you can do for this, because this really is the pivotal point of this topic, right? It's like, okay, step 1 was, really sort of diagnose where the negativity's at and how it's affecting you. Step 2 is, how am I contributing to it? How can I stop that and start leading by example? Step 3 is making that decision that you're going to be that beacon of light. So up until now, it's really been about how you are leading yourself, right? It's been about self-leadership. But now it's going to be about leading others and inviting your leadership team into this space that you're creating, right? So there's multiple different ways to do this, right? I'm just going to throw 3 of them out there today, okay? And as always, I'm not expecting you to do all 3. I just want you to kind of consider these and think about what resonates best, what might be a good fit for the situation I'm in, right? I'm not prescribing one over the other. They're all really effective. And as always, they are evidence-based. They've been tried and tested. I'm not just making this stuff up, okay? All right, so one way to open this door to your leadership team to join your positivity is doing it with language and communication techniques. Okay. Now, specifically, you can engage in what's called supportive communication. And we actually talked about this in depth in episode 7. So be sure to check that out for a deeper dive, because I don't want to be repetitive, but essentially, just to recap it here very quickly, it involves essentially 5 pieces. 1, being mindful of your positive to negative statement ratio, right? Because we need, like I mentioned earlier, negative, by default, negative outweighs positive. So we have to be mindful that for every 3 to 5, that we need 3 to 5 positive statements for every 1 negative. Okay, that's how much extra positive there has to be for it to overcome the impact of a negative statement, right? So you're going to be mindful of that positive to negative ratio. We have to be congruent, direct, and honest when we're communicating. And this next step is about you got to be descriptive. You got to use a descriptive and factual approach rather than a judgmental or evaluative approach. Now, this is basically pretty similar to what I was mentioning in one of the earlier steps, right? Which is, what are the facts of what just happened? Not the story, not the judgment I'm ascribing to it, but what are the actual facts, right? And so that's part of this communication tool. So you've already had a little, if you're going to go with this one and you're doing all of these steps that I'm sharing with you, then you've already had a little practice on doing this, right? So you can actually start to use it in your communication with other people. A part of this supportive communication is focusing on the problem, not the person, right? So it's not that Jane is incompetent. It's that Jane is having some kind of issue completing the project, and the completion date is the problem, and how can we help Jane to fix it, right? It's not her. Don't make it personal. Focus on the actual problem and how to fix it, right? And then finally, this supportive communication is about looking for opportunities to validate people rather than invalidate them, right? So being open, being respectful, seeking their input, asking questions, looking for areas of agreement, okay? And this supportive communication, it's an excellent way of communicating that's been developed, tried, and tested by Kim Cameron and Jane Dutton out of the University of Michigan. And they're two of the most prominent researchers in the field of positive leadership. And when you use supportive communication, it really does help to foster a positive and thriving environment. And so if this one, and I'm giving you kind of the 30,000 foot view of it right now, but if it's appealing to you, then absolutely go check out episode 7, because I do a much deeper dive and I go into all 5 of those steps, okay? So that's one way to do it, is you can start using supportive communication and introducing that into the team. The next way that you might do this, which is, when I say this, I mean inviting your negative leaders to actually start becoming more positive. The next way to do it is to start a strengths-based conversation. And a great way to do this is invite your leadership team to take a strengths assessment, right? Everybody takes it, including you. And for this, I recommend the VIA Character Strength Survey. You can take it for free at their website, viacharacter.org. That's VIA-character.org. Or you can take it for free, or you can pay a small fee and you can get like a full-blown report and analysis on the assessment. But either way, it's right there on the website. Also, you can take the Gallup Strength Survey, and that's a nominal fee, and you can find that at gallupstrengthcenter.com. Also, if you buy any of the books by Gallup, you get a code in the back of the book that you can take to take it. So, that could be cool, right? You could actually buy a Gallup book on leadership, and everybody, you sort of hand it out so people have this book. They may or may not read it, but they've got the code in the back where they can take the assessment for free, right? So there's other assessments that look at strengths, but those are my 2 go-tos, the 2 that I use the most in my work. And so have everybody take this assessment, and then have someone assemble everyone's top strengths. You might want to do it yourself or have your assistant do it. And so have someone assemble everyone's strengths in one document and circulate that so people can compare and look at it and then discuss. Like, bring it to a meeting, start the meeting with it, okay? You'd be surprised just how much positivity comes out of this simple act of taking a strengths assessment and then discussing top strengths with each other. It's really powerful, because the thing is, people like to be validated. They like to know their strengths, and they like others to know them too, right? It's like you suddenly start to know somebody better when you see in front of you, oh, these are your top strengths. Because what also happens is, when we know each other's strengths, communication is almost immediately improved. Why? We're starting to understand each other better, right? So instead of thinking that David is just a pain in the butt because all he does is ask questions in meetings and it drags them out, maybe his top strength is curiosity. Oh, okay. So David's not just trying to be annoying. He's actually just inherently curious. And now you look at David a little differently, right? And you can reframe what is going on. David's not asking those questions to be a pain in the butt or to annoy you. He's asking those questions because he is inherently curious. Well, if he's inherently curious, how can you channel that strength? How can you leverage that strength for him and for you, right? So not only does a conversation about strengths help us get to know each other better, build more respect, build better communication, but it also opens the door to actually starting to leverage the people around you, right? In a way that is going to make them happier in their work, and it's going to make them more productive and perform at a higher level, because there's so much research on this, right? That when we know our strengths and we're able to apply them, we have these great outcomes at work, right? We're so much more engaged. Now, if this all sounds a little utopian to you and you think you might be met with some negative Nelly resistance to this, like, ugh, pshaw, I'm not going to take this stupid assessment. Like, what is this all about, right? If that's sort of what you think you're going to be greeted with, I hear you. I've been there. So try this, because this is what I often do when I know I'm going to get that, or I know I'm kind of dealing with what I like to call a hardcore, no touchy-feely stuff crowd, right? Where it's like, it can be very corporate. We don't want to, do any of this like personal development stuff. It all feels too woo-woo, right? Well, guess what? When I know that that's happening, or it might happen, go in there armed with facts and some research and some statistics. Because the fact is that when leadership and teams and organizations identify their strengths and they start to leverage them, they are, wait for it, 17% more productive, 21% more profitable, they produce 20% more sales, and they have 10% higher customer ratings. Plus, absenteeism is reduced by 41%. There's 42% less turnover, and they have 40% fewer product defects if you're in a product business. So, those are kind of reasons that you might want to take a strength survey, right? And that kind of approach, right, this sort of evidence-based approach that I use a lot, is very effective in overcoming those immediate knee-jerk negative reactions, or this feels so woo-woo, right? Because when you speak in in that language, right, with those people that that is their language, that's what they care about. They care about the bottom line. Guess what? Now their ears are perked up. Now they're interested, because you've got evidence and you've got data to back this up. And with that data, I mean, if that's not reason to want to take a strength survey, I don't know what is. And by the way, that data isn't based on, just like one survey and, 100 people. It's based on research among 82,000 teams, which translates to 1.8 million employees in 230 organizations across 73 countries. So yeah, Gallup's pretty good at collecting this data, and they're pretty good at looking at it. You can call it solid, okay? This isn't like, there's a massive margin of error. We don't know if we can generalize. Like, this is a huge amount of data that they're looking at and that they're finding these results in, okay? All right, so that's the second idea, is to go at this from a strengths perspective and start a strengths-based conversation by inviting your leadership team to take a strengths survey, and then obviously discussing the results with one another, right? Okay, the third idea I have for you is to engage your leadership team in a process that's called appreciative inquiry. Or sometimes you see it as AI, not to be confused with artificial intelligence, okay? Appreciative inquiry. Now, believe me, we could do a whole podcast on this topic alone, right? And then, hey, maybe we will. But just to give you the overview of this, okay? Essentially, appreciative inquiry is a technique, a model that was developed at Case Western Reserve University's Department of Organizational Behavior way back in 1987, okay, by David Cooperrider and Suresh Srivastava. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Forgive me if I didn't, please. Now, these researchers felt that there was so much focus on problems. We got this problem to deal with. We got this problem to solve, right? But they felt like organizations were constantly just focusing on problems. And so they developed a new and more positive way to generate ideas and make improvements. Now, this doesn't mean that problems are ignored. They're not, okay? What it does mean is that the focus gets shifted away from, what's going wrong? What fires do we have to put out today, to what's going right? How can we build on this, right? And so in appreciative inquiry, there's basically 4 elements that the team is invited to do. And you could set up a workshop day of this. You can go longer than that. There are people who are trained to actually, administer appreciative inquiry sessions. And essentially the 4 areas are: 1, discover, which is everybody identifies the organizational processes that are working well. Okay, like what, and your leadership team, that might be just applied to the team itself. It might be applied to the organization. You can pick, right? So what's working well? What is going well? We're not going to ignore the problems, but for a moment, let's just put them off to the side and let's talk about where we're having success, right? The next part is dream. And here, people are invited to envision what the ideal future looks like, right? So what does the organization, what does this team leadership, or this leadership team look like in the future if it was exactly the way we wanted it to be, right? So now we're giving space and permission to really focus on the positive, to really imagine, like, what is the best that this could be? What does that look like, right? Then, not surprisingly, the third step is the design, which is basically planning and prioritizing the processes that would work well. And then the final step is destiny, or some people call it deployment, right? And so this, of course, is execution of your design, right? So essentially, what's going well? How can we leverage this in the future? What does our ideal future look like for this team or this organization? How are we going to do that? What's our plan? What are we going to prioritize? And then boom, let's go do it. Okay. Now, of course, you can go through those 4 steps in, one session, but the implementation, that 4th step, is going to take longer. But this appreciative inquiry model has been very successful in turning companies around, increasing revenue, increasing engagement. And essentially, it starts with a discussion that's brought to the team through a positive and strengths-based lens, right? Like where you're seeking to identify what is going right, what are our strengths, how do we build from here? So if that idea is appealing to you, you may want to check out more on this. You can, of course, go online and Google appreciative inquiry. You'll get a million hits. Okay, this has been around for a while. And Cooper Ryder himself has a quick read book on it that he co-authored with Diane Whitney. It's simply called Appreciative Inquiry, A Positive Revolution in Change. All right, so you have 3 solid ideas now for how you can do this step 4, which is starting to invite your leadership team to join your positivity. Now, like I said earlier, I just want to reiterate, I'm not suggesting you do all 3. Just pick one that resonates with you right now and start with it. See how it goes and take it from there, okay? If at some point you want to experiment with the others, have at it, right? All 3 of those are incredibly complementary, right? They dovetail together, but trying to do all 3 at once is going to drive you nuts, okay? So as always, I don't provide all of this for expecting you to go implement it all. I want you to pick the items that resonate, that you think will be suitable for you, for your team, for your organization, and then run with that, okay? And again, I want to impress that this isn't going to be a magic wand that changes everything immediately, okay? But if you set the example and you're consistent, remember, lighthouse, beacon of positivity, you will see the shift. Now, for those of you who are counting, I said there were 5 steps to help you address this situation. And yes, we still need to cover step 5. Okay, so step 4 was kind of long because I gave you those 3 ideas for how to do it. But I wanted to spend time there because that really is a pivotal measure. And step 5, frankly, step 5 is only when you have exhausted all other options, okay? It really is. So it's this. Remember that you always have a choice. Right? If you faithfully try all these suggestions, right? If you work through steps 1 through 4 and you pick one way to implement step 4 and you give it time and still you see no change, you're still feeling brought down by the negativity around you, then there's always the option of making a change. You can choose to take your positivity elsewhere. Okay? Like you don't have to stay where you are. Now, I want to be really clear on this. I am not suggesting that you try to, be a beacon of positivity for a week or 2 and then just give up and look for a new position. I am talking about this truly being the last resort, right? Because sometimes, and the reason I mention it, the reason it's even in there is because, especially if we have been somewhere for a long time, we've got the leadership role, there's a level of comfort even if we're not happy, right? Sometimes we can be happy in our misery. And we're familiar with it. It feels comfortable. It's like an old glove. And we sort of forget that there are other options out there. Okay. I mean, this happened to me. I was with a company for 11 years. I was partner there. And when I first thought about leaving, it was almost unthinkable. I didn't know any other way to be because I was so ensconced in that organization, right? It was my life. It was a huge part of my identity. And so to think about leaving was really a weird process. But the more I realized I did want to leave, the more you explore other options, you start to see, oh my goodness, there's a whole big world out there that I just haven't even been aware of because I've been so busy, doing my thing right here in this organization. So I'm not advocating for that. I'm definitely not advocating that it's like, okay, everything's negative, I'm just going to leave. No, because you can work on it like we've talked about, and there are ways to turn it around. So I'm advocating for you to turn it around. But if you really cannot, and you've really given it the old college try, then remember, life is big. The world is big. There are many opportunities, and you don't have to sit in a horrible cesspool of negativity for the rest of your life. Okay. All right. So there you have it. I hope this provided some helpful direction for Melinda and those of you who have been dealing with any negativity in your leadership team. So you've got 5 steps to address this. Just to recap. Number 1, be aware. When you sense negativity, get curious about it, explore it so you can see more clearly what's causing it. Number 2, look inwards. How might you be contributing to the negativity, and how can you stop doing that so that you're starting to set an example? Step 3, focus on being the best you can be and how you can bring the best out in others. Step 4, open the door, make the invitation for your leadership team to join your positivity. And remember, you got 3 great ideas that are all tried and tested for doing this, right? So the first idea is to use supportive communication. Check out episode 7 for more on that. The second idea is to use a strengths-based approach to do the VIA strengths assessment or the Gallup strengths assessment. And the third idea is to use the appreciative inquiry process, all right? And then finally, step 5, if all else fails, after you've absolutely given it your whole all, remember you have a choice and you don't have to live with constant negativity in your life. Okay, thank you for joining me for this week's Positive Leadership Movement episode as we really dived into how can you stay positive among a negative leadership team. Join me next week when we're going to talk about how to set and achieve BHAGs. I know you've heard that before. If you have not, BHAG simply means big, hairy, audacious goals, or some people call them Everest goals, right? Like, how do I climb Everest? How do I do that massive goal? And yes, I know we all know about goal setting, okay? But I'm talking about the type of goals that stretch you and your organization to reach new levels of excellence, okay? I'm talking about a whole new uber level of goal setting. So you're going to want to join for that. Tune in next week. And remember, if you've got a question or comment about positive leadership, send me an email at questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com and I'll answer it in a future episode. For now, this is Alex Bratty signing off and thanking you for being part of the positive leadership movement and inspiring me to do what I do every single day.
Make sure you subscribe to the show. If you like this episode, please rate and review. If you want to get more from Alex, check out Happiness at Work, where she provides leaders with a proven path to cultivate a positive work culture that increases performance, productivity, and profitability. Go to happinessatworknow.com. Join us next week and harness the power of positive leadership for your organization.